Hey guys, what up? Tony here. My heart, my vision, and my passion is to take God's message of purity to the world. The Power of Purity is a 501c3 nonprofit, and like any other ministry, the reach and impact of what we're able to accomplish through the power of purity is predicated upon the finances that we have available. In view of this, we need help. And it's only because of faithful ministry partners like you that the Power of Purity is touching lives literally all around the world. Would you consider making a donation or becoming a monthly partner with this ministry so we can continue to unleash massive amounts of destruction upon the kingdom of darkness? Every dollar you give is tax deductible, and every dollar will be used to advance the healing message of purity to a world that desperately needs it. If you've been touched and encouraged by the Power of Purity, and if you believe in the message of this ministry, would you prayerfully consider becoming a monthly partner? If so, you can visit the Power of Purity website at www.powerofpurity.org, and at the top of the page is a donations link where you can become a vital part of this ministry's impact. Thank you so much for your love, your prayer, and your partnership. God bless you.
Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingracia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast. I'm really glad you could be with me today. And if you listened to the last episode, you know that I began an interview with some really special guests, Steve and Jamie Van Valen, and we're going to continue today's episode with part 2 of that interview. And Steve and Jamie have an amazing story of God's ability to restore deeply broken people and deeply broken marriages. It's a story of God's amazing mercy and grace and power and ability to redeem broken lives. So I'm really glad you're here today, and I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. So without any further fanfare, let's just jump right back in to part 2 with Steve and Jamie Van Valen. And you guys are back with me today, so welcome.
Hello.
It's nice to be here, Tony.
I'm glad you guys are here. You guys have a pretty amazing story, and we began to get into your story last week. And Steve, you shared with us kind of this pretty weird experience you had in Seattle and how that planted some seeds in your heart and life. I gave this metaphor of the dominoes, how it was the first domino that kind of affected the sexual trajectory of your life. And then, Jamie, you began to share with us kind of the early origins of your sexual self and how you were profoundly influenced by what was going on in your family of origin, in your home, your mom and dad's relationship. Your dad left your mom. He had a ton of pornography. You found your dad's porn. That affected you. It illustrated to you what you thought men wanted in a woman. And so you went about the business of kind of trying to be like those women. And we might just continue because I think we left off there. So you kind of move forward in your adolescence in kind of a period of promiscuity.
That's correct.
And then where do we go from here in your story? You got married pretty young and started making babies. Is that true?
I think, though, that one of the things that affected me most profoundly is when at one point when I was 15 years old, I went to a party with a friend, and at that party I was raped. And
oh my gosh!
And at school that next week, literally the people involved. There was a guy on the hockey team, and
he was a senior, and you were a freshman.
Yes, and they bought themselves shirts. The cheerleaders and the hockey team bought themselves shirts that said "Jamie Who" on them, which really led me to believe that I was worthless, And so it was a pretty big event for
It's
me.
huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. So, am I to understand that this rape basically was public knowledge? A lot of the kids at school knew what happened.
That's correct.
And instead of anybody rallying around you or supporting you or demonstrating love or concern, instead they chose to make fun of you over this event.
Yes,
To
that's
mock you, to shame you.
Yes.
And how would you put words to it? How do you think that affected you?
I felt very broken at that point. I was very depressed, very sad, very shamed, very. I just really did not want to be in school. I didn't want to really. I was embarrassed. So yeah, I felt pretty bad about myself.
Right. And
I didn't like me very much at that point.
right. You didn't like yourself, and that kind of sets you up for even more darkness in a sense, because in a sense you don't like yourself, you don't respect yourself, you're depressed. It's almost like you're not even going to try to take care of yourself now. Almost like, I don't care what happens to me, I don't care what people do to me. It's almost like you're very undefended in life or something, and it's just kind of setting you up for even a darker part of your journey.
Yeah, so I met a boy who was different than what I thought all the other boys was. He carried a Bible around school, and he was the only one that did defend me in that instance, and we started dating, and pretty soon I was pregnant. I was 16, and
16.
yes, that's correct. And so we had a baby when I was 17 years old, and he was breaking up with me on and off throughout my whole pregnancy, on and off, and then basically the crux of the situation is that he was not in love with me.
That's what he would say.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But, he cared about me, but he was not in love with me. But we were having sex, and I guess that he was okay with that.
Right. It feels familiar. From the story that you shared in our last episode, guys are very willing to have sex with you, but there's no love.
No. So, I started going to his church, and it was a non-denominational church. It was very charismatic and fun. I grew up Catholic, and really was interested. It was a really interesting place to me. They danced around the building, and they threw their hands up, and they sang, and they clapped, and it's such a different experience. And I thought it was fun, and I thought it was exciting, and I thought that they really knew who God was. And because growing up Catholic, I really didn't think that I knew who God was. I thought that.
So, are you saying that this kind of brings God onto your radar? This kind of awakens your spirituality?
Yes, that's correct. And I gave my life to Christ in that church at 16 years old. I was baptized there, and I had a baby, and very shortly after I had that baby, I got pregnant with the second child, and at 17 years old, and so I was going to have an abortion because, of course, I couldn't raise two children at my mother's house. I just didn't think that was a possibility. And the night before I was supposed to go get the abortion, he came over after having had a meeting with our youth pastor. We were still in youth group.
Wow. I guess so. 16 and 17 years old.
And he had a meeting with our youth pastor, and he had told him what was happening, and told him that he couldn't allow me to have an abortion, and so he came over and he proposed, asked me to marry him. So there we got married. I was 17, he was 18.
17 years old, married, 2 babies.
Correct.
And marrying this man who's
Doesn't love me.
coming in and out of your life, telling you he doesn't love you, but he's being compelled by his youth pastor to do the right thing, and he should marry this girl.
Correct.
So you guys get married, and let me guess, it's a white picket fence, and everything is awesome, and you guys live happily ever after.
How did you know? Well, his name's not Steve, so.
Yeah, that's the white picket fence.
Yes, that's it.
So what happened?
Well, I lived through, 7.5 years of marriage with this man. We had 3 children, and he's a good man, just not a good husband. And he was not faithful. It was very evident all through our marriage that he didn't love me. There was no reason that he should have married me to begin with. And so in my psyche and in my own person, I understood that it was because I was unlovable. It was my problem for sure that I was.
That's what you believed about yourself.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then 6 months after I got divorced, I met Steve.
Okay. And if I could just say a word there, Steve, where you left us off in your story, you had the Seattle event that plants some seeds. You come back to St. Louis. You have this job where you can travel during the day. You're going to these kind of seedy places on the east side. You are married at this point. You're really getting deeply involved in this kind of highly sexualized sex culture and sexualized life, meeting people at these clubs and having these experiences. Your wife, of course, wants nothing to do with this. So where does your story go from there?
Well, my wife knew nothing about that. No one close to me knew nobody knew anything about that. That was part of my strategy of I'm going to live my own life and be what everybody expects me to be.
So there's a real duplicity about
Yes.
you. There's 2 Steves at this point.
I was even involved. My brother had a church in St. Louis, and I lived right across the street and was involved with the youth in that area of St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
It was right at Manchester and Tower Grove. It was a really rough.
Like you were a youth leader?
Yeah, you would say that. I mean, I taught Sunday school, and there were times when there was one time that I could think of where I actually went out. My wife was out of town visiting her family. I went out and was out all night and picked up a gal and had sex with her, and then came back and taught Sunday school that next morning.
Steve, I'm shocked. You're telling me that you were participating in ministry and yet acting out sexually? People could do that?
Hard to believe.
Did you know that the latest statistics tell us that 50% of pastors watch porn on a regular basis?
Yeah, it went worse than that with me, though. I mean, I really didn't even... that experience in that neighborhood, which was a rough neighborhood in St. Louis, sort of turned me off of God altogether. I saw people come to the Lord, clean up their lives a little bit, and develop some hope, and then it didn't last. And then they would go back to their ways and fall further away from God, and then they would lose all hope, and they would be in worse shape. And so that's the way I saw things. My frame of reference was I was pushing God away, and then I just got to a point where I just didn't really believe in God. But I'm teaching Sunday school because that's what people expect me to do, and that's part of my strategy.
And it feels like that shift in your own heart, really away from God and away from spiritual things, sets you up to embrace your sexualized lifestyle even more, to kind of push even deeper into it, because in your heart and conscience, it's like you're deciding there's not even a God.
Right. Where I'm having serious doubts. I certainly never had a personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
Okay, so where do we go from there? What happens next?
Well, Jamie and I ended up working for the same company. And we ended up taking a trip together out in Colorado where I really got to know her, and we had an affair, and I was struck with her.
You're still married at this time.
Yes.
Jamie, you're not married.
No.
It was a very intense time because we spent hours and hours and hours talking to each other, staying up all night one night, and then having sex, and then staying up all night the next night, talking and have sex. And it was I was smitten by Jamie.
And so you fall headlong into this affair
Right.
with Jamie, even though you're married.
Right. And then I actually, after that trip, I had a short vacation that I with my family. But when I got back, Jamie and I resumed our affair, and within just really a few days, my wife knew something was going on and challenged me what's going on, and I just told her, and she kicked me out of the house. Of course. So I told Jamie what had happened, and I said, she kicked me out of the house. You believe that?
That was so funny. That was a funny event.
So Jamie and I came together in sort of an explosion of her story and her past, and my story and my past, and we were just...
You're two very highly sexualized people. I think fair to say from our frame of reference now, who we understand God is and our knowledge of God, you are two very deeply broken people around your sexuality, kind of had been on these separate journeys that were kind of both a train wreck around sex. Then you meet each other, you have an affair, you fall in love. Steve, you get divorced. Now you guys get married. And so what happens with these two very highly sexualized people that find each other? How does this play out in your lives and your marriage?
Well, he drags me down into the gutter with him. That's what he does, Tony.
He does?
Pretty much, yeah.
I was kicking and screaming the whole way.
We didn't talk about Jamie's interest in drinking. That was her main coping mechanism through that. She really became a pretty serious alcoholic. And I drank plenty, but I was more of a sex addict, and I was more in it for the party than I was for the alcohol. But like I said, we became very sexually adventurous, and at one point, Jamie, you can tell your story.
Well, Jamie, can I just ask, so at this point in your life, somewhere alcohol comes into the scene. You start drinking heavily. You become a full-fledged alcoholic. So now there's kind of two parts. There's the alcohol part, and there's the sex part.
I started drinking when I was about 12, 13, and was by the time I met Steve, I was certainly an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm picturing a barber pole, the white and the white stripe and the red stripe. They spiral together. Mm-hmm. That the alcoholism and the sex parts somehow intertwine together. Is there anything to that?
Well, of course. Alcohol makes you lose all of your inhibition. It just gives you the ability to do, say, or be whatever you want. I'm funnier, I'm cuter, I'm sexier, I'm better as an alcoholic. I'm a better human being.
You're probably not the Jamie that you don't like.
No, and I don't care either.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't really care whether or not other people like me as much, or I don't care as much about
So
it.
it feels like the alcohol is really serving a purpose, even though it's incredibly misguided. It's helping you escape you. It's helping you escape your life.
Yes, it's definitely my coping mechanism.
But when you drink, it like lowers your inhibitions and invites you to be that sexualized Jamie.
That's correct.
So in that sense, they kind of go together. And on top of that, you meet this man who is highly sexualized and has this proclivity towards sexual adventure and going to clubs and meeting people and having these sexual exploits. And so it's kind of like you guys just were a recipe for disaster. It's like you come together and it's this very toxic, highly charged, sexually charged energy is part of your chemistry or something.
The first time Steve took me to a club, it was a strip club, but it also had a portion of this place was kind of set aside for the public, and regular people would just go in there. They'd dance and they'd throw off their clothes and they'd have sex up on the stage. And the first time Steve took me there, I was so angry with him. Called him a pervert, made him take me out of there. Then the next time that we went to one of those places, he got me drunk first, and then we went, and it's way better. It was way more fun then.
The next place wasn't quite that atmosphere.
So, but the point being, you guys kind of follow Steve into his preferences.
He didn't have to drag me kicking and screaming or anything.
Right. So you guys kind of fall into this sexualized lifestyle.
Well, I think another demarcation point. Seattle was one, but eventually Jamie started working at a strip club, and that sort of opened up all kinds of new doors and people into our lives that accelerated the trajectory.
So it's like-minded people, very sexualized people that are living this lifestyle and having these adventures and exploits, and so it's kind of like its own subculture or community of people that you're moving in now. And at the epicenter is sex.
And alcohol.
And alcohol, yes. Now, I'm not sure that we need to go into all the gory details, So, what do you want to say anything about that period? How long does that go on?
11 years.
11 years into your marriage. You guys are pretty much living this way. Okay, so I can only imagine how many stories you could tell in 11 years. Things that happened, people you met, adventures you have. We don't need all the gory details. Do you want to say anything about that time frame at all?
Well, what made it even more feasible was that I had when our children were small, we had all of them, Jamie's kids and my kids, every other weekend, and then we didn't have any kids every other weekend. So from the very beginning, that gave us flexibility. And then as the children got older, as Jamie's oldest daughter, Brooke, as she became babysitting age, we were less concerned about. We were still able to go out.
Right. So it's kind of like your first job afforded you the flexibility to do what you want, when you want. You guys had flexibility to kind of pursue this lifestyle.
Right.
Okay. So
there is one thing I'd like to say about that.
Okay.
Without the alcohol, there's many times that during those years that I was repulsed by my own self, by myself also. So like sometimes, Steve said, well, it's what validated us. We were validated. That's what was our identity. It's who we were. But I also want to say that sometimes the thing that validates you, that makes you, gives you your identity, also invalidates you, because there were many times I can tell you that I was ashamed of myself. Sometimes it was a fight for me to get to the place where I wanted to keep going that way. But so I feel like I did not like the person in the mirror very much,
Right.
and not just because of my alcoholism, but also because of the way we lived our sex life, but because of the way we lived our marriage.
Right. So you have your conscience is trying to speak to you, and you had this spiritual experience when you were a teenager. God is in your life. You believe in God, so your conscience is probably informing you. And in your clear moments, your conscience is convicting you. You have a sense that you're not living right, a sense of conviction. I can only imagine that it was in moments like that you would turn to alcohol to just kind of numb that voice, kind of deaden that. And
Yes.
Yeah, and I had a lot of the same thing, in that I often just wondered, why am I, like I said last week, why am I like this? I couldn't figure out, is anyone else as bound up in sex as I am? I just didn't think so, and I couldn't figure out why.
Right. So you knew, even you knew that, like, the way we're living, the way I am, is like out of the ordinary. Like,
Yes.
regular people aren't this extreme. Like, we are way, way out there when it comes to the sex thing.
Right. But we were also very deeply, deeply attached to each other and cling to each other and loved each other. And but it got to a point, though, where Jamie's alcoholism was really getting worse and worse, and I started to talk about that with her, like, Jamie, you're a little bit out of control. And it got to a point where it's like, Jamie, I don't know how long I can live like this. I don't know when it might be, but I just don't think I can be with an alcoholic my whole life. I drank a lot, but I just didn't have the allergy and the obsession that Jamie did. The obsession and the allergy, as AA puts it. So anyway, in 2001, the summer of 2001, my mom came down with cancer, and she died very quickly. And we spent
10 days.
10 days. We were with my family for 10 days. And it was very uncomfortable for Jamie. She never was comfortable around my family for obvious reasons. And anyway, I for the first time in all this time I was with Jamie, I felt God's presence in the house as my mom was dying.
Wow.
And my siblings came back and forth different times, but Jamie and I stayed up there. And I found a stack of notebooks that were actual prayer journals that my mom prayed every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. They were dated, and each page had a date and a time. And then page after page, I just read every single day about my mom praying for me. And
she would write out her prayers.
Yes, yeah, and we read this, and it had a big impact on me.
Like, it softened your heart. Like, God used that to do something in your heart to begin to woo you.
Yes, I think that softening your heart's a really good way to put it, because I started to long for a relationship with God, because I felt like God is real. I felt like, for the first time in a long time, I knew I could say that I know my mom is in heaven after she died.
Praise God.
And I just had this overwhelming feeling that didn't quite go away, because we resumed our lives when we went back to St. Louis. But 6 months later,
Can I say an observation? It just feels like, though, God is setting things up almost like a chess match, because he's softening your heart and positioning you, wooing you where you're becoming more open to spiritual things. And at the same time, there's like this crescendo. You guys are moving in a kind of crescendo in your relationship around Jamie's alcoholism, where it's becoming less and less acceptable to you, where almost like it's positioning you to be in the place like, we're going to have to change our life. You're going to have to stop drinking. And Jamie, I think for you, if you stopped drinking, it was going to be hard for you to maintain the sexual lifestyle.
Well, I explained to him that if you want me to stop drinking, then you're going to have to give up all the extracurricular sexual activity where we will not be. If I'm not going to be continuing to drink, we will not be continuing in that lifestyle.
Wow.
right, and I understood that. I think I knew that. So my mom passed away in August, which is right in the beginning of football season, and so Jamie, you can take it from
Who
here.
quits drinking during football season, really?
You guys are big football fans,
Yes.
Yeah,
and you love Mizzou. Is that right?
No, go blue. No, Michigan.
we love the
Wolverine.
Michigan Wolverines, and the Rams were doing great.
That was a joke.
I know.
You know, and there was another.
Mizzou's all right.
Steve and Jamie, for my audience, have two gods. The living God, Jehovah, and Michigan football.
Hallelujah.
That's,
They're a lesser god.
yeah, and I've made a point to make that even more of a lesser god in recent years, but.
Hey guys, with that, I'm going to have to jump into this episode because the clock tells me that we're out of time for today, but please come back next week for the continuation of this exciting and amazing story from Steve and Jamie Van Valen. And you know how they tell jokes and they always say, I've got good news and bad news. What do you want first? And I've noticed that people always seem to want the bad news first. And let me just promise you that Steve and Jamie's story, it's an amazing story. It's a powerful story. It's a story of redemption, but it's a story of bad news, but then also a story of good news. And these first two episodes, we've kind of heard the story of the bad news, but stay tuned because I promise the good news is coming up and you're not going to want to miss what they have to share next week in the third episode of their story. So I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for tuning in. God bless you and have an awesome day.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.
The Power of Purity Podcast. Real talk for real men who struggle with real temptation in the real world, who are ready for real answers and real success. The Power of Purity Podcast.